The purpose of video 8 is to summarize the narrative care model as a therapeutic approach to counseling in general and to Christian counseling in particular. This summary has to be watched along with videos 1 through 7. It does not include all the relevant information and well-researched explanations of the biblical and neurobiological details regarding chronic stress and the basic notions behind the model. It is therefore essential to read the book mentioned above if you plan to use this model as practicing counselor. In order to understand narrative care as therapeutic approach, we have to understand the following rationale behind the approach. We continuously receive sensory information via our 5 sensory organs. Our limbic system processes this sensory information and triggers a short-term neurobiological, productive or defensive stress reaction. Our cerebrum and other related neural systems in our body process this information and integrate it with existing memory information and imagination information, which may trigger a long-term chronic stress response, including emotion-driven speech and or defensive or offensive behavior, which may cause, maintain, aggravate, or prolong physical, mental, social, and spiritual conditions and disorders. In order to deal effectively with this spectrum of health issues, we have to deal with chronic stress. This means we have to minimize external and internal stressors and enhance our resilience. Narrative care as a therapeutic approach is therefore aimed at the minimization of internal and external stressors, both on environmental and neurobiological levels, and at sustainable resilience enhancement in the face of chronic stress. A successful outcome due to this approach is formed, reformed, storied narratives that facilitate sustainable stressor minimization and resilience enhancement, both on environmental and neurobiological levels. In order to understand the following explanation, we have to keep our definitions of narrative and storied narrative in mind. Narrative: an eyewitness account of connected events based on sensory information taken in via our sensory organs and with our proverbial eyes open. Storied narrative: a fictitious or imaginary, eyes closed, meaning-forming description based on a narrative and hosted by a dedicated proliferated neural network comprising, amongst others, sensory, autonomic, cognitive, and behavioral neural subnetworks. The narrative care agenda for every therapeutic encounter is user-friendly in its rhythmic simplicity and therefore easy to remember. It consists of the following 4 somewhat overlapping and recurring cycles: turn up, care, listen, and share. Turn up. Interaction with a supportive environment is therapeutic in its own right. To turn up, therefore, means that we as narrative carers intentionally and with integrity step into the very responsible role of presenting a supportive environment to someone in distress. An environment within which he or she may feel welcome and safe enough to interact and share his or her distressing storied narratives, which has the potential to facilitate enriching and thriving neural re-networking. Care. To care means that we as narrative carers recognize, validate, and respect those in distress while displaying an inner calmness which may encourage them to share their distressing storied narratives in their own unique way without interference interruption, or criticism. Listen. To listen means that we as narrative carers actively listen to the narratives and storied narratives of the client in distress, while taking note of the following signs of chronic stress: environmental stress or scenarios, chronic neurobiological stress reactions, danger emotion responses, emotion-driven speech behavior, emotion-driven lifestyle patterns. This process of assessment plays an integral part of the therapeutic agenda for every session. Listen. To listen also means that we as narrative carers actively listen to the narratives and storied narratives of the client in distress while taking note of the following external and internal stressors: clear narrative accounts of sensory information in the present, identified by him or her as unfamiliar or inconsistent. The storied meaning that he or she attached to memory information in the past, identified by him or her as uncontrollable or incongruent. The storied meaning that he or she attached to imagination information in the future, identified by him or her as uncontrollable and incongruent. We start the listening process by asking the narrative question: what happened, happens, or may happen that makes you feel the way you feel? And then take note of clear narrative accounts of sensory information in the present, identified by him or her as unfamiliar or inconsistent. Clear signs of chronic stress in the present, environmental stress or scenarios, chronic neurobiological stress reactions, danger emotion responses, emotion-driven speech behavior, emotion-driven lifestyle patterns. Listen. Example 1. You. What happened, happens, or may happen that makes you feel the way you feel? That's the narrative question. Client. Sometimes my wife says she loves me, but yesterday, out of the blue, she loudly called me sensory information. A lazy loser with no ambition, unfamiliar, inconsistent, present. Unlike the successful husbands of her friends, I do not know what to do, uncontrollable. This is not how it should be, incongruent. I feel so ashamed, danger emotion. I struggled to fall asleep last night and this morning I'm still a little bit anxious. Stress reactions. We continue the listening process by asking the storied narrative question: what did not happen, does not happen, or may not happen that makes you feel the way you feel? And then take note of the storied meanings that he or she attached to memory information in the past, identified by him or her as uncontrollable or incongruent. The storied meanings that he or she attached to imagination information in the future, identified by him or her as uncontrollable and incongruent. Listen. Example 2. You. What did not happen, does not happen, or may not happen that makes you feel the way you feel? Storied narrative question. Client. Unlike her friends who appreciate their successful husbands, my wife never acknowledges my successes or compliments me when I am successful at work. I do not know what to do. Uncontrollable. This is not how it should be. Incongruent. I feel so disregarded. Danger emotion. I think, meaning giving. I do not live up to her standards. I still remember how my mom always, memory information, familiar, consistent in the past, humiliated my dad before they got divorced. I suppose, meaning giving, we will also end up divorced like them. Imagination information, uncontrollable, incongruent, future. After listening, we're going to share relevant narrative care interventions with a client in distress to facilitate the formation of clear narrative accounts of new sensory information in the present he or she can identify as familiar and consistent. We also want to share relevant narrative care interventions to facilitate the reformation of the storied meanings that he or she attached to memory information in the past, from uncontrollable and incongruent to controllable and congruent. And lastly, we want to share relevant narrative care interventions to facilitate the reformation of the storied meanings that he or she attached to imagination information, from uncontrollable and incongruent to controllable and congruent. And by the way, you will find narrative care interventions on our YouTube playlist named Narrative Care Interventions. Sharing tools. Therapeutic speech behavior is the primary sharing tool in play when we use narrative care as therapeutic approach. With our therapeutic speech behavior, we create, at strategic moments, a sense of optimal demand, possible opportunity, and real option regarding those things that can actually be done by the person in distress. This strategic maneuver aims to help the person regain a sense of optimal control, which will most probably facilitate new, sustainable, wholeness-enhancing, safe and stimulating sensory experiences, which may give birth to new wholeness-enhancing narratives. These tools come in the following shapes: regroup, refocus, re-narrate, re-story, his story, retell, return, and repeat. Regroup. Help the person break an overwhelming amount of chaotically disorganized historical detail of emotionally disturbing events into smaller, clearer, and more controllable bite-sized chunks. Refocus. Ask, which one of the storied narratives you named makes you feel the way you feel? Then, may I help you name your pain? Then, patiently share the whole spectrum of possible emotions with him or her. See video 3. Re-narrate. When the narrative changes, the storied narrative also changes. Again, ask the narrative question to clarify the narrative as an eyewitness account of sensory perceived information, and replace the last 4 words with the name of the specific emotion he or she identified. Re-story. When we challenge distressed people to re-narrate or to clarify the narrative on which they base their story, we actually facilitate controllable incongruence between the narrative and the story. Then ask the story in question what did not happen, is not happening, or may not happen that makes you feel the way you feel. The person's responsive brain then has to adjust its neural structure over time to form a neural network that can eventually accommodate a reformed storied narrative. His story. It may be our duty of care as skilled narrative care practitioners to introduce and explain relevant narrative care therapeutic interventions to our clients. Interventions that may empower them to progress through the phases from incongruence to congruence at their own pace. These interventions are presented as forms of spiritual practice based on biblical principles. See the above mentioned book. Retell. Clients should be encouraged to retell newly formed, wholeness-enhancing storied narratives repeatedly during follow-up sessions and later in public. Return. Sharing these newly formed storied narratives by means of newly formed speech behavior is an essential part of the therapeutic process and necessary to establish a successful long-term outcome. The whole narrative care therapeutic cycle has to be repeated with every initially identified distressing storied narrative. Remember, our storied narratives are nothing less than perceivable expressions of the not perceivable neural networks of neurobiological structures and systems within our responsive brain, accommodating them. While these neural networks cannot literally be accessed, limited access to them may be gained via the storied narratives they accommodate. While a distressed person develops clear storied narrative accounts of his or her distressing sensory experiences, these accounts will facilitate the formation and reformation of neural networks, of neurobiological structures and systems within the person's responsive brain, to meaningfully integrate and accommodate these accounts. Remember, while a distressed person does not develop clear storied narrative accounts of his or her distressing sensory experiences, the person's responsive brain will not develop neural networks of neurobiological structures and systems to meaningfully integrate and accommodate these accounts. Distressing sensory information will then find itself strewn all over the vast neural network terrain of his or her responsive brain, like debris on an open field, even years after a plane crash. It will repeatedly be fed back to his or her reactive brain in a pathological recursive pattern, causing repeated feelings that things are not the way they should be, incongruence, resulting in chronic stress. Remember, while interacting with our environment, we may encounter the underlined danger edge of any one or more of the following environmental scenarios, which then may trigger a neurobiological stress reaction within us. Wholeness, content sad. Safety, safe unsafe. Comfort, comfortable irritated. Demand, competent overwhelmed. Option, encouraged frustrated. Opportunity, included deprived. Financial security, secure insecure. Rule, justified guilty. Standard, worthy ashamed. Regard, regarded disregarded. Control, confident disempowered. Loyalty, supported betrayed. Consistency, certain uncertain. Relationship, loved lonely. Health, well unwell. And spirituality, hopeful hopeless. Remember, when any one of the above underlined danger edge emotions rise in intensity, that emotion may eventually spill over into raw, irrational anger, which may elicit stressful speech behavior, which may cause a stress reaction within ourselves. and within those with whom we interact. If environmental scenarios change, and these changes are familiar, our reactive brain will normally experience a sense of safety. It will continue to enhance productive action throughout our whole body, including offensive, defensive, or creative action. If these changes are familiar, our reactive brain may experience a sense of definite danger associated with fear. If these changes are unfamiliar, though, our reactive brain will experience a sense of potential danger associated with anxiety. In both cases, it will trigger a neurobiological stress reaction that will prepare our whole body for protective action within parts of a second. Thank you for watching videos 1 through 8, which is a basic summary of the narrative care model as a therapeutic approach to counseling in general and to Christian counseling in particular. This summary does not include all the relevant information and well-researched explanations of the biblical and neurobiological details regarding chronic stress and the basic notions behind the model. It is therefore essential to read the book mentioned below if you plan to use this model as a practicing counselor.